It's story time with Nani! Okay, so I'm going to do this little segment that I told you in my previous video called Playing with Buttons. Basically, I was playing with buttons in that video, and it's like, I don't even know. So I only have 50 minutes to do this, so it's always going to be a short story. And I'm going to read you a story, and since I didn't have one prepped from, like, a memory, I'm going to pick one out of a book. So at the back of Clockwork Angel, we have a page called A Short Story Set During City of Bones. It's like 3 pages. And it's called Magnus's Vow. And that is what I'm gonna read you for story time with Nani! Okay? Yay! Okay, so let's start. Okay. Magnus Bane lay on the... Okay. Let's get one thing straight. I've only rehearsed this once, so don't judge me. Magnus's Vow. Magnus Bane... Okay, let's set this straight. Magnus Bane is my favorite character in the whole wide world that came out of Cassandra Clare's beautiful little head. So I'm reading this. Okay, yeah. Okay. Magnus Bane lay on the floor of his Brooklyn loft, looking up at a bare ceiling. The floor was slightly sticky, as was much else in the apartment. Spilled fairy wine mixed with blood on the floor, running in rivulets across the splintery floorboards. The bar, which had been a door laid across two dented metal garbage cans, had gotten wrecked at some point during the night during a lively fight between a vampire and Bat, one of the downtown werewolf pack. Magnus felt satisfied. It wasn't a good party unless something got broken. Soft footsteps pattered across the floor towards him, and then something crawled onto his chest. Something small, soft, and heavy. He looked up and found himself staring into a pair of wide golden green eyes that matched his own. Chairman Meow. He stroked the cat, who needled his claws happily into Magnus's shirt. A bit of silly string fell from the ceiling and landed on both of them, causing Chairman Meow to leap sideways. With a yawn, Magnus sat up. He usually felt like this after a party, tired but too wound up to sleep. His mind was humming over the events of the evening, but like a scratched CD, it kept coming back to the same point and spinning there, sending his memories into a whirl. Those Shadowhunter children. He hadn't been surprised that Clarissa had finally tracked them down. He'd known Jocelyn's stopgap memory spells wouldn't work forever. He told her as much. Stay still. But she'd been determined to protect the girl as long as she could. Now that he'd met her, conscious and alert, he wondered if she really needed all that protecting. She was fiery, impulsive, brave, and lucky, like her mother. That was if he believed in luck. But something must have led her to the Shadowhunter of the Institute, possibly the only one who could protect her from Valentine. A pity that Maurice and Robert were gone. He'd dealt with Maurice more than once, but it had been years since he'd seen the younger generation. He had a vague memory of visiting Maurice and Hodge, and there'd been 2 boys in the hallway, about 11 years old, battling back and forth with harmless model seraph blades, and a girl with black hair and 2 braids had been watching them and vociferously complaining about not being included. He had taken very little note of them at the time, but now seeing them had shaken him, especially the boys, Jace and Alec. When you had so many memories, sometimes it was hard to identify the exact one you wanted, like flipping through a 10,000-page book to find the correct paragraph. This time, however, he knew he crawled across the slippery floor and knelt to open the closet door. Inside, he pushed aside clothes, and various packets and potions. Feeling along the walls for what he wanted, when he emerged coughing on dust balls, he was dragging a decent-sized wooden trunk. Though he had lived a long time, he tended to travel light, to keep very few mementos of his past. He sensed somehow that they would weigh him down, keep him from moving forward. When you live forever, you could spend only so much time looking back. It had been so long since he'd unlocked the trunk. It came open with a squeal of hinges that sent Chairman Meow skittering under the sofa, his tail twitching. The heap of objects inside the trunk looked like the hoard of an unfastidious dragon. Some objects gleamed with metal and gems. Magnus drew out an old snuff box with the initials W.S. picked out across the top in winking rubies. The grinned at the bad taste of this thing, and also at the memories it invoked. Others seemed too unremarkable. A faded cream-colored silk ribbon that had been Camille's, a matchbook from the Cloud Club with the words, "I know what you are," written on the inside, covered in ladies' hands. A limerick side oval, a half-burned piece of stationery from the Hong Kong Club, a place he had been barred from, not for being a warlock, but for not being white. He touched a piece of twisted rope, nearly as the bottom of the pile, and thought of his mother. She had been the daughter of a Dutch colonialist. Yeah, I don't care. It's gonna be colonist man, and a Indonesian woman who had died in childbirth, and whose name Magnus had never known. He was alone at the bottom of the trunk where he found what he was looking for, and drew it out. Squinting, a black and white paper photograph mounted on hard cardboard objects that really shouldn't have existed and wouldn't have if Henry had not been obsessed with photography. Magnus could picture him now, ducking in and out from beneath his photographer's hood, racing with the wet plates to the dark room he'd set up in the crypt to develop the film, shouting at his photographic subjects to keep still. Those were the days when, in order to render an accurate photograph, one had to remain motionless for minutes at a time. Not easy, Magnus thought, the corner of his mouth flicking up for the crew of the London Institute. There was Charlotte, her dark hair up in a practical bun. She was smiling, but anxiously, as if squinting into the sun. Beside her, Jessamine, in a dress that looked black in the photo, but which Magnus knew had been dark blue. Her hair was curled and ribbons fell like streamers from the brim of her straw bonnet. She looked very pretty, but very unhappy. He wondered how she would have reacted to someone like Isabel, a girl her own age, who obviously loved shadow hunting, who showed off her bruises and the scars of her marks, as if they were jewelry instead of hiding them with Michelin lace. On the other side of Charlotte stood Jem, looking like a photographic negative himself, with his silvery hair and eyes turned almost white. His hand rested on his jade dragon-topped cane, and his face was turned toward Tessa's. Tessa's hat was in her hand, and her long brown curls blew free, slightly blurred by their motion. There was a faint halo, a light around Will, as befitted his nature, and would have surprised no one who'd known him. He had not been able to stand still for a photograph. As always, he was hatless, his black hair curling against his temples. It was It was a loss not to be able to see the color of his eyes, but he was still beautiful and young, and a little vulnerable looking in the photograph. With one hand in his pocket and the other behind his neck, it had been so long since Magnus had looked at the photograph, the resemblance between Will and Jace struck him suddenly, though it was Alec who had the black hair and those eyes. That very startling dark blue. It was Jace who had more of Will's personality, at least on the surface. The same sharp arrogance hiding something breakable underneath, the same point wit. He traced the halo of light around Will with a finger and smiled. Will had been no angel, though neither had he been as flawed as some might have thought him. When Magnus thought of Will, even now, he thought of him dripping rainwater on Camille's rug, begging Magnus for help. No one else could give him. It was Will who had introduced him to the idea that Shadowhunters and Downloaders might be friends. Jem was Will's other better half. He and Will had been parabatai, like Alec and Jace, and shared the same evident closeness. And though Alec struck Magnus as nothing at all like Jem, Alec was jumpy and sweet, sensitive and worried, while Jem had been calm, rarely bothered, older than his years. Both of them were unusual where Shadowhunters were concerned. Alec excluded a bone-deep innocence that was rare among Shadowhunters, a quality that Magnus had to admit drew him like a moth to a flame. Despite all his own cynicism, Magnus looked at Tessa again. Though she was not conventionally pretty, in the way Jessamine had been pretty, her face was alive with energy and intelligence. Her lips curved up at the corners. She stood as Magnus supposed was appropriate. Between Jem and Will, Tessa who, like Magnus, lived forever. Magnus looked at Detritus in the box of memories. A love's past, some of whose faces stayed with him as clearly as the day he'd first seen them, and some whose name had barely remembered. Tessa, who like him had loved a mortal, someone destined to die as she was not. Magnus replaced the photograph in the trunk. He shook his head as if he could clear it of memories. There was a reason he rarely opened the trunk. Memories weighed him down, reminded him of what he had once had but did no longer. Jem, Will, Jace, Jessamine, Henry, Clare, Charlotte. In a way, it was amazing that he still remembered their names, but then knowing them had changed his life. Knowing Will as his friend had made Magnus swear to himself that he would never again get involved in Shadowhunters' personal business. Because when you got to know them, you got to care about them. And when you got to care about mortals, they broke your heart. "And I won't," he told Chairman Meow solemnly, perhaps a little drunkenly. "I don't care how charming they are, or how bravely, or even how hopeless they seem. I will never, ever, ever." Downstairs, the doorbell buzzed, and Magnus got up to answer it. And it beat a minute. Okay, so I messed up on the name. It wasn't Jace, it was Jessamine, and it wasn't Clary, it was Charlotte, and I'm sorry. And this is Storytime with Nani. Subscribe! And if you like this, and you want me to redo a specific story, comment it below! Please let it have witches and warlocks and shadow hunters and demons and angels and and if the book's too big for me to read it in 15 minutes, because that's how long my videos have to be. If not, I have to get them checked out with a phone, and I don't have a phone. So literally I'm about to meet the 15 minutes score. Oh. And I'll read chapters. So this is Storytime with Penny. Subscribe! like and share to make me famous. Or not, I don't really care. Bye! Love you.